Hello and welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. It is Friday. It is a very exciting day. A lot has happened over these last 24 hours especially. Lots more to talk about than we were thinking there would be last night when I was messaging Tony about the running order for today, that's for sure. I'll come to Tony Haggerty first. How are you, Tony?
I'm very well, Laura. Yourself?
Not too bad. Very excited about what we've got to talk about today, and things are looking a lot more positive than they have been in recent weeks. And we are joined, as always. Jim has not done a Benjamin Button, I'm afraid. He has unfortunately been unable to join us today, and we are joined by Colin Watt. How are you doing, Colin?
Yeah, I'm doing good. If anyone wants to mistake me for Jim, I'm okay with that because he's a fountain of knowledge. So it's an honour to be on with you guys today.
Watch that chair, because seemingly you jump around in it, or maybe that's
gets you excitable, does it? Gets you excitable.
As I say, you know.
Plenty to talk about today. We've got two new signings to discuss: Liel Abada and Kyogo Furuhashi. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing those correctly, but I'm sure they will be names that will trip off the tongue in the weeks and months to come. But before we do that, we've got our Friday Guess the Celt. Now, when I came up with this name, I thought Jim was going to be joining us. Colin, I don't know how much you'll remember about our Guess the Celt, but we'll go with it anyway. I'm wearing the strip that he donned for the 0-2 short a time that he was at Celtic, and it is, of course, the Portuguese.
Oh, Celtic Laura, that is anticipation.
Signed for us at a time where, although we had a few foreigners in the team, the idea of a Portuguese striker banging in the goals was still something very exotic in the Scottish game. What are your memories of obviously the controversial lead up to Cadete signing and the short time he was at the club?
I think that's for you, Tony. Yeah.
For me, yes. You cut out there, Laura. Just for a brief second. Yeah, I. You know what? Someone put a tweet up last night and said that Cadete was a better finisher than Larsson. Now that's highly controversial, but I think it's, you know, it's kind of newspaper between the two, because Cadete was sensational, his figures were sensational, and his goals were sensational, and it is a pity that team, had that team won the league, I reckon they would have stayed together for a crack in the Champions League. They were born entertainers. You know, Di Canio, Van Hooijdonk, Cadete, and also Andy Tom. You know, Andy Tom, who's kind of forgotten in that team, the role that he played, but he was a terrific player too. But Jorge Cadete was fantastic. You know, I couldn't believe when Celtic signed Jorge Cadete. And then I couldn't believe what was taking so long for him to actually play a game for the club. And then we all know what happened with that. And then obviously further on the goal at Ibrox, which was mysteriously ruled out, you know, which should have counted, you know, and just, you know, I think that team swashbuckled their way through that season, Tommy Burns' team. And you ask a lot of Celtic supporters, you know, Celtic's teams that finish second to Rangers, they're never fondly remembered, ever. That one is. That one got a standing ovation in the very last game against Wraith Rovers. And it was incredible. They'd won nothing. But what they did win was the hearts and minds of the Celtic supporters. And it was an indication that Celtic were on their way back and they were going to compete with Rangers moving forward. And I think that's what the supporters appreciated, because there was a lot of bad times in the 90s. But that particular season, when they lost one game to Rangers, albeit, and lost the league by 4 points, a lot of draws that season, but the football they played was incredible. And I know you love Jorge Cadete, but you know, I had a lot of man love for Jorge Cadete, because I just thought he was a genius at work. You know, he really was a wonderful and top-notch and top-class striker, and I couldn't believe that Celtic had signed him. And there's that great story where the Radio 5 live mics went down because the noise that greeted the goal, his debut goal against Aberdeen, and the dink and just the impudent way that it was just, I'm good, here's how good I am, dink, got your whack for that. It was just, those microphones went down, you know, Radio 5 Live went down, and, you know, just stuff like that, just add to and he scored some cracking goals. I remember a header he scored against Aberdeen at Pittodrie, you know, cross was ripped in by Tosh and near post head, and it was like a flash. You know, I thought I wouldn't see anything like him. Then Henrik came along. You know, so, and most people are biased towards Henrik because he got 242 goals in 315 games. I know that because I've seen them all, but Cadet's year and goals record is comparable in terms of ratio. You know, and he just, that team, you know, Tommy Burns' team, attack. They just made you smile. They made you proud to be a Celtic supporter. And it's testament that a lot of people think that it's some of the best football seen since the Lisbon Lions. That's quite a compliment for a team that won nothing. And Cadet spearheaded that along with Van Hooijdonk and Di Canio. You know, so a lot of affection for George Cadet, and I can understand why. And it's just a shame the way it all ended with the three amigos and the contractual disputes with the Canadian owner, Fergus McCann, at the time, who told them that once they'd signed the contract, that was it. There was no going back on these kind of deals. But I think most Celtic supporters remember that side as just arguably the best Celtic team not to win the league.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, they were certainly, I've said it before, that Tommy Burns team was, I was probably about 7 or 8 years old when they kind of were at their peak, and they were certainly the first Celtic team that I fell in love with. They were, as you say, that the phrase swashbuckling is overused in football, but they were nothing if not that. And my brother often says that for all the success we had under Martin O'Neill and in the years since with the quadruple treble and all that, he was a teenager when Tommy Burns' team was at its peak and was a season ticket holder, and says that was without doubt his favourite time to be a Celtic supporter. You know, he enjoyed the matches a lot more then than he has in the years since, and it's understandable why. Colin, from your perspective as somebody who won't necessarily remember that team, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective, you know, where players like George Cadet and the three amigos sit in the history of Celtic for somebody who's learned about them afterwards.
It is, as Tony put it, it's quite sad that it was that era that you've seen guys like Cadete and Van Hooijdonk sign for Celtic, because imagine having someone like that in the season where you stopped 10. Imagine them being part of that annals of history. It is really unfortunate at that time. What is quite interesting though is when you think back to that era and you're signing guys like George Cadete, like Pierre Van Hooijdonk, how much football has changed from there to now, and the kind of players that we're signing now. So obviously we'll speak about Kyogo joining, but imagine being able to sign someone who was like a Portuguese striker in and around the first team squad of the national side. Pierre Van Hooijdonk, a Dutch striker, well established, even Di Canio as well. Imagine having that pulling power to sign someone like that now. It does show you, even though you think, oh, it was only the other day, it was only the other year, how much football's changed in that time. And if we could even get to that stage where you're signing players like that now, that would be fantastic. Where would we be in the European stage? But back then, it was just really great scouting that brought guys like that to the club. And it's great to look back on it, but it's sad when you compare it to where we are just now.
David Hay was part of that scouting network, and Andy Ritchie, I believe, the guys that identified these kind of players, and somehow they managed to bring them to the club. So hat tip and big up to them, because I think swashbuckling is the precursor to the rip-roaring, free-scoring, never boring, isn't it? You know what I mean? So, and I think they defined it as well. So had I known that phrase then, I would have described it them as that.
The bold Andy Ritchie, Morton legend Andy Ritchie.
Another maverick and talented player, a Di Canio-esque type, you know, just had to leave Celtic to flourish, but another one of those players that you think, what would he have really been like in a Celtic jersey? And you know, you can only wonder.
I remember speaking to, sorry Laura, just on Andy Ritchie.
On you go, Colin.
I remember speaking to Ali Begg earlier on in the year, and they were talking about Andy Ritchie, and they were saying that when he was working for Manchester United, they would speak to Alex Ferguson about his time at Aberdeen, and they said every time they went down to Greenock, it was always, right, no matter what, watch Andy Ritchie, keep an eye on him, don't let him do anything. 1 minute into the game, Andy Ritchie plays a long ball up front. It's 1-0 Morton. He's like, what did I just tell you for the last 3 hours? The whole bus journey from Aberdeen to Greenock, keep an eye on Ritchie, keep an eye on him. Undone in the first couple of minutes. That was a kind of genius that we never got to see play for Celtic.
That Ferguson team couldn't beat Morton. See that brilliant Alex Ferguson team? They struggled against Morton. You know how you have bogey teams? Morton was Aberdeen's team at that time, and it was all down to Andy Ritchie, who always turned it on. Sir Alex.
There's all these coulda, woulda, shoulda stories in football, and that's another interesting one. Just before we move on to the modern day thing, Tony, Colin raised an interesting point there about, you know, comparing eras and stuff like that. The thing that always surprises me when I look back is we think of the Martin O'Neill era and the Wim Jansen era as very much separate to that Tommy Burns era. And I was looking back the other day, and there was obviously the picture of Henrik Larsson in the famous Bumblebee strip. You forget that, you know, Van Hooijdonk, Di Canio, Tom even played with Henrik Larsson at Celtic for a period. You forget how close those two periods were and how quickly things can change in a club from one season to the next.
Oh, without a doubt, you know, it's you know, you look at that kind of 2 year spell, the players that came in, as Colin touched upon there. Imagine you had them all at the same time. I know it is a could have, should have, but you know, your scouting was top notch back then. Imagine being able to keep them. Imagine that team. Imagine Tommy Burns' team in the Champions League. You'd have seen a lot of 5-4s and a lot of 4-3s, Juventus style. You know, but goodness, you would have been entertained, absolutely entertained, and you would have enjoyed the ride. And I think players of that calibre deserved, one, to win the title and to play in the Champions League group stages. You know, they deserved it. They just fell short because remember Celtic were rebuilding, and they just, you know, and Rangers had Gascoigne and Laudrup, who were Celtic, you know, Three Amigos equivalent. You know, those players lift your club out the ordinary, give you something special. And that's why they're so fondly remembered, because you forget that they were up against a phenomenal Rangers team. You know, so, and, you know, and they just came in, I wouldn't say they were thrown together, but they were kind of like, go on, express yourselves. And, you know, you look at you know, a lot of people have mentioned the withdrawing or the withholding of the registration. You know, I think it dragged on for a couple of months. I think Celtic drew 11 games that season. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but it was around about that. And in those couple of months, they would have played league games that they could possibly have turned 1 point into 3. Again, it's ifs and buts, and these things happen. But you have to say that it could have made a difference. You know, it could have made a big difference, and it could have made a big difference to Celtic moving forward. But then people say if that team had stayed together, you would never have got Larsson. So what do? You know, but these, I think, you kind of look back and you look back in both eras fondly. Burns, Jansen's era, and then Martin O'Neill's era is just something completely different altogether because Celtic were going toe to toe with real heavyweights and culminating in Seville. So that took it to another level with the right recruitment and the right players, you know. So, but those, the Tommy Burns era and the Jansen era, that they're special for all sorts of reasons. But most of those reasons are like the likes of Cadete, Van Hooijdonk, Di Canio, and Larsson.
Football is just so full of those sliding doors moments. I think we would keep things the way they are as far as the Three Amigos were concerned if it guaranteed us Larsson every time. But who knows the way things turn out. John McFarlane on YouTube, and thanks everybody for commenting on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter where we are live, says Tommy Burns' team and the Martin O'Neill team of 2002-2003 were the two best squads not to win the league. And I couldn't disagree with that, to be honest. But there's one thing that we wish, if we can't win trophies, then at least being entertained as Celtic supporters is something that we enjoy. Speaking of which, we will move on to more current news. We've had 2 new signings announced today, or within the past few days, I should say. Liel Abada, the Israeli internationalist, he's had a cap for Israel, coming to us from his homeland. He signed for us a couple of days ago, and he was followed by a somewhat surprise announcement this morning of a brand new Japanese forward called Kyogo Furuhashi. I'm stumbling on that name all the time, but we'll get there. I'll just call him Kyogo for now. As everybody knows, if you've seen my Twitter this morning, I've already been making up songs about him. But no, I am not going to sing it today. Giza song. No, Studio O'Reilly. I'm not doing it. Not until at least I've got a couple of Magners in me anyway. But Colin, I'll come to you first. We'll talk about Kyogo before we go back to Liel Abada. Before we talk about either of them as a player, I have to say I was particularly encouraged by the fact that Kyogo was signed by us for 2 reasons. It was kept under the radar and seemed to be done and dusted pretty quickly, and also it's absolutely unmistakably an Ange Postecoglou signing of that. There can be no arguing. What were your thoughts when you heard the news this morning?
It really caught me off guard. It got announced by his team at 3 a.m. UK time, I think it was. Mm-hmm. So unless you're an early bird or a late night partier, then there's no chance you've seen that until you woke up this morning. But it moved at a very quick pace. I mean, it was about 3 a.m. and then it was picked up in the morning papers, and then by 8:30, that was it. It was done and over the line. It is I mean, we always go on about, well, Celtic, you're linked with this player and we've agreed a deal. Let's get the job done. This was done in record time for Celtic. I mean, we're still looking at trying to get the Starfelt deal over the line because the mission to Moscow for his medical seems to take forever. But no, it was great. It's exciting. What I've seen of the clips of him, I know YouTube clips can be very deceiving. I mean, we even managed to make Amido Baldi look good in YouTube clips, but it looks exciting. It looks as if it's the kind of style that Ange has been going on about that he wants to play. And we were speaking about this on the Wednesday Bulletin the other day. We're saying the one player that would have really fit into Ange's style now we previously had is probably someone like Scott Sinclair. And looking at the clips that you see of him, that's the kind of style of football that Kyogo seems to be. He seems to be someone who's on the left-hand side but wants to cut in to get the shot away. Very good with both feet. So if he's as good as what Sinclair was in his first season at Celtic, we've got an absolute gem.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Certainly a lot of positive feedback coming from Dan, our friend over at the Japan Times, says he's a quality player. A lot of the statistical accounts on Twitter regarding statistical analysis for Celtic are saying that he looks an exciting player. Tony, I'll come to you in a second, but just to read out a quote from Ange Postecoglou at the announcement of the signing, he says, "We are delighted to bring Kyogo Furuhashi to Celtic. He's a player of real quality and clearly someone I know well. I think he will add something special to our squad, and I'm sure the way he plays will excite our supporters. We look forward to welcoming him to Celtic." Tony, we've been banging on so much over the past wee while. We banged on about it with Neil Lennon and with any manager that we've had. The bare minimum we expect from our board is to back their man. If you're going to appoint somebody like Ange Postecoglou, you have to give him the resources and you have to give him the support to do the job. This is a massive indication that looks like what we're going to do going forward, does it not?
The one pleasing thing for every Celtic supporter this morning was the hand of Ange is all over this transfer. Bang, the job's done, right? This is a guy I wanted, this is a guy I want. Get this deal done for me. And he's been brought in, and I love his name, Kyogo Furuhashi. Don't know if he's a Japanese legend, but he sounds like one, doesn't he? You know what I mean? So 14 goals in 20 games in the J League, decent. Iniesta rates him highly. Says he's, and there's I was reading that there was a Soccer King, I think it's because of a website over in the Far East. I've said he's the next big name to watch in the Japan national team. So they all can't be wrong, right? Now, this is what we wanted. We wanted players that the manager knows, right? Persons of interest, as I call them, that the manager knows, but bringing their expertise And the manager has come in and said, right, I need players in the wide positions and defensive positions, right? Which is a good sign already. He knows where the gaps are in the team, and he's trying to plug them, right? So, and he's 26. This guy's entering the prime of his career. 4-year deal, bit of commitment, and £5 million layout. He's going straight into the team. Might even be getting, we used the number 7 jersey, last jersey. So that's a big step, and big shoes to fill. But I've been looking at him, and the comparisons will come thick and fast. But I read that he's a more mobile Shinsuke Nakamura. And Nakamura made a real impact when he came to Scotland. And if Kyogo Furuhashi can make a similar impact, then Celtic will have won a watch here. And I don't like comparisons and stuff like that, and I hate putting pressure on guys, but he's coming in and he's coming into play because the manager clearly trusts him. And out wide, he's got a decent scoring record as well. So, I'm really enthused by it, and I'm really positive about it, and I'm also happy about the way Celtic conducted their business on this one. And this is the first sign for me that the Ange revolution is kicking in, because he's stamping his authority on this team now. He's bringing in players that he wants, and as you alluded to there, he seems to be getting the backing. I wrote a colour piece the other day after the players get injured, and they looked a bit threadbare, and I meant to end with the payoff line, ground control to Major Dom, but I scattered it with Bowie references, right? So, but he's clearly had a word with Dom, and things are happening now, because they are, obviously still waiting on Starfelt, and Abada's in the door as well. So things are moving in the right direction, I think, for Celtic supporters.
Yeah, Laura, see the thing is, that's the last 2 signings, you're close to £9 million having been spent. It does suggest that there's money there to spend, or do you think that's more the case of, it looks as if the Chris Ajer deal's done, so we're already starting to spend that money?
Well, I mean, the Chris Ajer deal is something we'll certainly come to talk about later in the show, but I think we have to remember as well that, Frimpong went for how much money back in January? Was it, I can't even
11
remember.
million roughly. Yeah.
11 million. So, there was that money sitting there as well to spend. You would imagine that, like, Scott Brown being off the wage bill has freed up quite a bit of money in terms of wages. So, there has to have been money there to spend, unless we were really, wasting an awful lot of that. That said, there's the caveat of COVID and the hit that the club's finances will have taken in that regard. Some of it might have been used for that, but yeah, I can't complain about it. But just before we go on to talk about something else, Paul McCardle on YouTube says, "Thank you so much for having the show every day. I love the trip down memory lane, and we'll never forget Cadete's first 15 seconds on the pitch and the goal that he scored. Tommy and Billy Stark deserve much credit." So, yeah, thanks to everybody for watching. We tried with this feature with the guests of Celt to offer a little bit, especially over the summer when sometimes news is a bit slower, to just take that wee trip down memory lane and look back as much as look forward, because it's as much a part of being a football fan as concentrating in the here and now. I, for one, love a bit of nostalgia, so I'm glad to see other people are enjoying it. Colin, I'll come to you on our other new signing, Liel Abada. Now, he's a 19-year-old. He's made over 60 appearances for his club in Israel before joining. The question remains, given his age, but contrasting that with the number of appearances he's made, what do you think are the chances that he can have like an immediate impact on the squad when he comes in?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think when you look at it, is there some breaking transfer news coming in?
There we go. Tony will come back to you in a second.
Tony will come back to you.
That'll be Ange giving him the breaking news.
That's the new signing. Who do we want it to be? Leave your comments, and who is Tony about to confirm is just about to sign for Celtic? Let's go back to Abada though. Look, it's obviously very difficult for someone that young to basically up sticks and move thousands of miles away from his homeland, but it does show a confidence that he believes in himself, that he can do that as well. So I like that aspect of it. what I've seen in clips as well looks very impressive, and it does look though as though, again, this is an Ange signing. Ange knows what he wants to get out of him, which kind of puts the back burner on this whole, and I've seen it said a couple of times, he's the next Sved. He's the next Sved. And it's like, well, no, because at the time, I don't think when Sved signed for Celtic that necessarily he was someone that we were looking at. It was more a sort of project, whereas this seems like it's what Ange wants to bring into the team. Yeah, I think that's great. The only thing is, I'd be even more confident if he wasn't a Dudu Dahan signing. I can't believe we've pulled the trigger on the Dudu button already. So, Tony, who was signing?
Unfortunately, it's not a signing. I can't think of the agent Dudu Dahan without thinking of, I'm going to go Celtic Dania again, the Police song, I do, a da ha han. You know what I mean? Every time I heard his name as a journalist, I'm a journalist, but that's all I used to sing in my head. Yeah. You know, I'm not so sure about Abada. I think still, even though he's young, I still think he's got a contribution to make. He's been brought in for that reason. You know, I don't think age is a barrier to Ange Postecoglou if he thinks he can do a job. And again, his MO is to play with two wide men, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, Abada on one side, you know, Furuhashi on the other side, you know, so buying, you know, Ajete or whoever it may be. So that's the kind of way he likes to go. So I won't be surprised if he starts with the two of them if they're available to play against Midtjylland, because I think if he doesn't get Starfelt in, he'll want to keep the ball up there. He'll be getting fast wide guys that can take the ball a walk and create. You know,
that's a famous Cruyffian quote, isn't it? If you keep the ball further away from the opposition's goal, they can't score. You know.
What was the Jockstein one as well? The best form of defence is attack.
Yeah. And Will Shankly's, if you're stuck for options, just stick it in the net and we'll discuss them.
I think if you go with Cruyff, Steen and Shankly, you're not going far wrong. But Tony, I'll come to you on Abada again, just mentioning that. I've seen a bit of discussion online about exactly what role he will play in the team. He was labelled as a midfielder in the announcements from Celtic, but I've seen suggestions that he's a wide player, suggestions that he even played in a much more forward role for his club in Israel. My understanding is he's more of a sort of wide forward than a kind of James Forrest or Ryan Christie mould. Is that your understanding of how he plays?
I think he can play both. I think he can play wide and he can play through the middle. So he's a winger, come striker, you know, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. You know, I think if you're versatile that way, then and you're a front man for Celtic, then that's good, because we don't have a plethora of them and we need all sorts of options. So I'm quite happy that he can do both. Let's hope he can perform in both. And, you know, I think the more options you have in any team selection, you know, and if he's a good player, good players are good players, right? And I'm of the opinion you can't get enough good players in your football team. If you've got good players in your football team, you will be a good team. I mean, it's just you know, that's my thinking about football sometimes pretty, tunnel visioned. You know, so there's only one signing policy: sign good players. Goes awry when you don't sign good players. So you trust the manager that he knows these players and he's signing them because they're good, and they will be able to make an impact in that Celtic team, because Celtic last season weren't a good team. So these guys coming in will improve it and make the impact, the desired impact and effect that the manager wants. That's why they're here. And I think if you're a player at all coming into that Celtic team, you will know, if you've got faith in your own ability, that you can improve that team. You will grab that starting jersey and you will run with it. You know, there'll be no bedding in process. You just walk into that team and you exude an air of confidence and say, right, I can do this. Let me do it. That's the way I would approach it.
I would say so. I think you raise a good point there as well, that, you know, we've got two forward players coming in and giving us options, and you can never have too many good players in the squad. Colin, it made me think, having watched the the pre-season games, a lot of people were crying out for defenders, and I'm not by any means saying that we don't need those. We certainly do, but I think there's enough options there with some of the younger players that are coming through. You've got Hjelde, you've got Montgomery, you've got is it Murray as well? Dane
Murray, yeah.
There are some options there that, although they're not experienced players, you can maybe rely on those more, whereas I don't think we did have the options coming through from the younger teams in the forward positions, and maybe signings in the forward positions were more vital.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. I think when you look at the performances after we came back from Dubai, certainly, when you looked at the sort of forward three that we had there, you're looking at Karamoko, Armstrong Okoflex, and I can't remember who else was it, Cameron Harper, who left to go to New York Red Bulls. We were okay defensively, but we didn't create a lot going forward. And I mean, Okoflex missed the kind of tap in at the back post, and there was signs like that. But what I said at the time was the way that the reserves played was a sort of 4-3-3, the style that Ange is trying to bring in. And it's that you had the three up front, but they were very interchangeable. So it wasn't necessarily that Karamoko started, so he was the right winger, and he was the right winger for the whole game. He would switch and he'd go into the middle, or he would go left, and they would all kind of interlink. And I think that's the way that Postecoglou wants to play. When you're looking at these guys that he's signing, if Abada and Kyogo are guys that come in, I don't necessarily see them being just wide players. I see them that they're going to try and cut in, they're going to try and be the second striker, and it might not necessarily be that you've got an Edouard who's the guy that you always played the ball up to and everything came off him. It could be three forwards that are very interchangeable, and you're expecting goals from all three of them. You're not just expecting the wide players to put the ball into whoever is your number 9 up there. The three of them are number 9s. It's just that they can play right across that whole forward line.
I think so. I think that flexibility and the ability to mix and match those players is something that you saw, particularly with the England team at Euro 2020. Although they had Kane through the middle, you had Sancho, Rashford, Sterling, who could all interchange and mix and match left or right, and it sometimes left opposition teams guessing as to whether what formation they would play and what way we would line up. It was nothing to do with what order they were on the team sheet on Twitter announcements anyway. But before I come to Tony about some of the other news, Colin, just because you don't usually appear on a Friday, we've spoke last week about it with Tony and Jim about Ajeti and while we're still on the forwards. What have your opinions been on his performances during the pre-season, and do you think he's got a future at the club? We talked about a second opportunity for him with Jim and Tony last week. Do you think that's something he's going to take a hold of, and do you think that's something that we can build on?
I think you got to hope that he does, and the early signs are that is what he's trying to do. A big criticism that he got last year was he didn't look fit. He looked as if he was very sluggish. He wasn't that interested. But certainly in the 2 games, and I know you can't take everything off pre-season, but so far he has looked as if he's got himself into shape. He's certainly chasing the ball down. He's playing the way that Postecoglou wants his forwards to play. They've got that high press. And so far so good. 2 goals in 3 games. If you get the service to him, I think he knows where the back of the net is. And that was our biggest problem last year, was we didn't create chances. We were expecting Edouard to drop into midfield, to play a 1-2 with Turnbull or with McGregor, and then have to maybe take the ball 10, 15 yards before putting it in the net. Ajeti's someone who doesn't want to move out the 18-yard box. You get that ball to him, he'll stick it in the back of the net. And that's where his 2 goals have came from so far. So if that means that bringing in guys like Abada and Kyogo are going to get that service to him, I think he could be somebody that gets 20 goals this season.
Here's hoping, and with David Turnbull providing chances, that'll work out as well. So Ryan Kelly on YouTube says, seen a glimpse of Abada the other day and he looks promising. But that's enough about the forward line. I'm getting myself all excited just thinking about it, and I'm seeing 5, 6 and 7 goals. What were we talking about? He loves scoring more than the opposition, Ange Postecoglou, and if you score 5, we'll score 6. Who knows? That might be what happens going forward.
Does that mean we're going to need to change the lyrics to Vindaloo? We're going to score one more than you. Tony, I'm sure you can work on that.
I'm not a huge fan of that song as it goes, but anyway. Tony, I'll come to you on your favourite player. I'm sure you'll be sad to see him go. Kristoffer Ajer. Looks as if it's all but confirmed that he's going to Brentford. We were having a wee discussion before we came on the show this morning, on live this morning. It's a bit of I hold no ill will towards Kristoffer Ajer going in and plying his trade elsewhere, and he's given us 5 years of good service. It is an indication, though, of the modern game, isn't it? And what Celtic's position is in that modern game. The fact that he would consider Brentford a viable option for him.
I mean, I don't bear Ajer any ill will either. I just have my thoughts on him as a footballer, and I don't think he's an accomplished and a finished article. I think there's a lot of deficiencies in his game, but you're only worth how much someone is willing to pay for you.
Yeah.
When Brentford came in at 12, Celtic said no because they thought with 12 with 3 add-ons, Celtic said no. So quite rightly they've said no because they've come back in and offered £13.5 million. And I'm of the opinion if you're playing in Scottish football and you're commanding those type of fees for your players, you should be wearing a striped suit and a swag bag. I mean, you really should.
Yeah.
But Celtic's model has been that if you're going to come up, riding up from down south, we'll get round the table at 10 and we'll go up the way. And it's a fantastic model. The problem is, it just means you're letting your best players go. You know, and Russell's an advocate of this. He doesn't like the whole stepping stone FC about Celtic. You know, the players using it as a shot window and a short circuit to England. And we get that too. But see if Celtic had been a Champions League competitive club in the last decade and been in the group stages on a continual basis, then you'd be able to ward off Brentford, because you'd be able to say to them, well, you're in the Champions League group stages every year with Celtic, you're winning things, you're happy, you know, but they haven't been. And I'm not saying Chris Ajer's changing Celtic and going to Brentford to play Champions League football. He's going to a bigger stage, regardless of what you think about it. He's going to a bigger stage, and he's going to earn maybe a lot more money, maybe not much more. You know, we don't know what the wages are at Brentford, but he's in a short window where your career, if you look at Van Dijk, for an example, can go stratospheric. So, do you blame him? He's done everything he can at Celtic. You know, he'll be remembered for a wonderful winning goal at Pittodrie and slamming the ball home from 12 yards for the treble. Will he be remembered as a legend or a great player? I don't think so. Solid individual, but as I alluded to there, I still think he's got many deficiencies in his game. But if he can get down there in whatever position he plays, whether it be centre back or centre mid or wherever, if he can have a good 18, 24 months, you know, sky's the limit for guys like that. You know, and again, you can move your career on pretty fast. So, as I say, I don't wish him any ill will. I have my feelings about him. I don't think he's the real deal or the finished article, but thanks for playing, and go with our blessing. And the money that Celtic have recouped for him is sensational, to be honest. You know? So, can't argue with that.
No, I don't think you can. Somebody was saying if you look at the vague figures that are being bandied about, both in terms of what we paid for him, which I believe was around £250,000, and what we're selling him for, which is about 13.5 with add-ons, you're talking about 28 times profit on what you bought him for, which for a 5-year spell at the club I think is unarguable. Before I come to Colin, I was giggling when Tony started talking, not because of what Tony was saying, but Kieran in the comments asking if I use a coconut based shampoo because my hair was so shiny I could mop the floor with it. Kieran, thanks for that. I don't really know what to say other than cheers, pal. But
surely your next line is L'Oreal because you're worth it, right?
Well, exactly. I'll take the compliment anyway. But Colin, geez, I've forgotten where I was even. No, Ajer, Kristoffer Ajer.
How's Kristoffer Ajer's hair, Kieran? You can let us know about that.
Aye, well, it's nothing on Bauer. He was my favourite as far as hairdos go for Celtic players in recent years. And the man George Cadete, what a head of curls he had on him, by the way. But anyway, Kristoffer Ajer, Colin, Tony has had a hard time from some people watching this pod, even though I do personally agree with him. I don't think Kristoffer Ajer's a particularly good defender. I don't think he's much to write home about. I tweeted last night that I don't personally see his career taking the trajectory of a Virgil van Dijk, because I don't think he's half the player Virgil was even at the time he left Celtic, or obviously what he is now. I think, though, that he does probably have a favourite place in Celtic supporters' hearts, because regardless of his ability, you can't really deny that he's tried and he's conducted himself with about as much as professionalism. There's a lot of other players that have been accused of downing tools and spitting the dummy and whatever other phrase you want to use, but he isn't one of them, I wouldn't say.
No, and last season was the kind of epitome of what you were just saying. When you look at it, he was someone who we believe he was one of the ones that wanted to leave after the Ferencváros game. We've seen the reports saying that he was one of the ones, but I think consistently last season he was one of Celtic's best performers. And that might not say a lot considering how the season went with Celtic and some of the performances that we did have, but he was the sort of standout amongst that. And I agree with Tony to an extent. I think he's someone who has never really fully developed into that position, and it's something that he's had to grow into because he didn't come through the youth systems as a centre-back. He started as a striker and he's worked his way back in to the park. I mean, he might end up in goal at Brentford, who knows, but he's someone who didn't look overly comfortable at first at centre-back. He looked more comfortable at right-back for me, and there's been times where he kind of threw himself into tackles and you're going, you don't need to do that, just stand up, let the player come at you. He gave away a couple of silly fouls in that sense as well. I think he gave away a penalty or two like that as well. So he's going to have to learn, because those mistakes he'll not get away with in the Premier League. And Brentford are a team who, I watched them in the Championship last year, and if it wasn't for Ivan Toney, they wouldn't be in the position that they're in. If he had, no, I can't mention that name. Sorry, but if he didn't score that amount of goals, they wouldn't have been pushing for promotion. So all it's going to take is for someone like him to get injured or for him not to have a good season. And who do they rely on to back him up? And if Brentford are going to probably face attack after attack after attack next season, and they're turning to Ajer. I know they've got Potish Janssen in there as well, but they're going to turn to Ajer as what is their record signing at £13.5 million to be the guy that sort of keeps them up to an extent. It's not going to be that they're pushing for Europe. They're not going to be pushing for the top half. They want to stay up. And if they go back down, does that mean that Ajer only has one season at Brentford? Because he's not left Celtic to go to the Championship.
Mm-hmm. It's a difficult one. I tend to agree with Tony that his trajectory is to use it as a stepping stone and to hopefully have a trajectory that takes him beyond Brentford and towards the top end of the Premier League. And I think I speak for us on here and everybody at ACSOM when I say best of luck to him. Thanks for the memories and thanks for everything that you've given us over the past few years. Scoring that penalty that secured the quadruple treble for us will probably be the standout moment for as far as memories go. But as Jim says, and in honour of Jim, who isn't with us today, we move on. So, Tony, I'll come to you. I haven't managed to get your thoughts before now about the game against Bristol City the other night. I was covering it for ACSOM, and we had young Ben Mead on the show, a really talented young man who's putting out a lot of fantastic content. And again, if you're watching, thanks very much for having ACSOM on your show the other night and for coming on to do the match coverage with us. But Tony, what did you think of the game? There was promising parts to it, wasn't there? Even though a lot of it was, as my granddad would have said, a lot of dross in between.
Spare a thought for me. I had to write a 1,000-word colour piece on it, And,
oh, ouch!
Aye, when the colours dross and drab and grey, it was a bit. It were a bit difficult, but we got there in the end.
Mhm.
I did man by mans, and Callum McGregor just makes that team tick, right?
Mhm.
You noticed
Mhm.
in the team, but when he came back, I thought his passing was crisp and sharp, and it was to a Celtic player at all times. He's a tidy footballer, right? And allied to Turnbull, I think the two of them are getting a wee understanding, or development and understanding. I like that. I like the look of Sorrow till they get cropped. And I hope the hamstring tweak isn't too serious. But I'm liking that midfield, but I'd maybe like an enforcer there, right?
Mhm.
A real big enforcer. Just Ayer's height, but can maybe likes a challenger 6. So just protect those three, because I think they're talented guys, but they might lose a lot of 50-50s because it's just no their kind of game, the rough and tumble of it all.
Mhm.
That's just from what I'm watching. Thought Taylor got into a lot of good positions, but final ball was maybe lacking a bit Frimpong-esque. Took up some handy and great positions wide left and linked well with McGregor, but final ball, and then Ralston's final ball was non-existent. Another who galloped down the right but couldn't provide a cross worthy of the name. So there was various things that you were noticing, but you can certainly see the way he wants to play, get it down the channels and create that way. And and the injuries was a concern. With goalkeepers getting injured in warm-ups and stuff, seeing pictures of your fingers strapped, that's not a good look, and I have to say that the tackle for a friendly on Karamoko Dembele was bordering on a shocker.
Yeah.
You're just like, behave yourself, So he was unlucky. Mikey Johnson, again, I have my thoughts on Johnson. I don't know if you've cut it as a player, and he's been pretty unlucky with injuries, but it just seems every time you might be getting something from Mikey, he breaks down again, gets injured or whatever, So is he going to be the most reliable moving forward? I don't know. Jury out on that one. So and at the back, I like Welsh. Welsh starting to look like he kind of knows what he's doing, and would benefit from maybe having a Starfelt or a Julian alongside him, to talking things, but he's comfortable and he's a tidy enough footballer, but he still needs central defenders. No one, not two, in my opinion. I never read too much into pre-season results. I look at attitude. I look at the attitude of players. Liam Shaw coming on for Sorrow, doing exactly what it says in the tin. Just solid type. So Urigidi, my personal jury's out in Urigidi. I think he can be robust, but I think he lacks positional awareness. Positional sense at times gets caught out. So I'm trying to think. I mean, I think covered most players there, but that's from what I'm seeing. Off the top of my head for a 0-0 game, which obviously the result doesn't care, but you'd still like to have seen them win and put in a very good performance. But that of the 3 games, that's been the worst so far. But there were still positive enough signs, and if he thinks that the players he's bringing in can give him a bit more zip, which I think's the idea, then I'm all for it.
And Laura, that's exactly how Tony managed to get 1,000 words out of that 0-0 draw.
I was going to say a masterclass as far as that's concerned. He did not bad.
But it wasn't an actual type thing, he did this. A little bit more creative,
But no, Jim Hannaway on YouTube, thanks for commenting, agrees with Tony. Correct, Tony. Welsh shows maturity and calmness. This is his year. With Urigidi coming in, with Julian coming back, with Starfelt potentially coming in, Colin, I personally would like to see Welsh given a decent run in the team. I think he's earned it, and I think he is showing signs, as Tony says, of maturing into, a solid defender. What do you think are his chances of doing that? And do you think it's just a case of, if we want to be successful, having 4 centre-backs like that is the sensible thing anyway?
I think having 4 centre-backs is a necessary thing if you're going to be pushing. I mean, you take a look at the kind of way that we ended up last season we only really had 3 that we could turn to, and Welsh sort of established himself in as number 4. But then as the season went on, we really only had 2 because of injuries. If you've got that injury crisis, you don't really want to have to turn to Welsh playing alongside maybe an Uragide, because there's absolutely no experience in there. So if Starfelt comes in, that's sort of, you want him to come in as a first choice for the amount of money that you're spending on him. And then Julian, when he's fit again, I think would be first choice. Welsh, I think, has the ability to push them to, but I wouldn't necessarily see him as a starter. I think so far we've seen the best of Stephen Welsh, but I think there's still a lot that he needs to work on. And at that point, I don't want my centre-half still to be learning on the job. I want him to get the game time, but I want him to get it periodically. I don't want to be kind of getting into maybe a game against like the Champions League game necessarily here. I would say it is a weakness that we're getting in there with Stephen Welsh at centre-half alongside potentially who? I mean, Ajer's away. Is it going to be Beaton? Is it going to be Uragide? Who's actually going to be in there? It's not something that you're necessarily comfortable with. So I'd like to see us sign Starfelt, and I'd like to see us bring in another experienced head, whether that's a loan deal, which would allow Welsh to sort of continue his development, and then we can look next summer and make that decision. At least as long as you've got the 4, you're covered for injuries, and you know that the person that you're turning to has that experience and you can rely upon them. And I think Uragide's another one of these project players that we might actually see either play for the Colts team or go out on loan.
That's a good way to segue just into the last talking point I was going to make today, Tony. We've gone over it before, but it's obviously been announced there's now a new Twitter account. If anybody wants to follow the Celtic Colts team, you can do on Twitter. I can't exactly remember the handle as I'm sitting here, but Celtic announced it this morning. They'll be playing against Bonnyrigg Rose this weekend and starting what is at this stage an experimental voyage into the lowland leagues, and trying to provide an opportunity for some of the younger players to sort of establish themselves playing against regular opposition. What are your thoughts now that it's actually here, now that it's happening on the Colts team? Do you think can you see it being a success or a support either for Celtic going forward or for the Scottish football in general?
I think it has to be looked upon as both, but let's not kid ourselves. I said at the time that this was done for the benefit of 2 clubs, at Celtic and Rangers, isn't it? Because they're the only ones that can afford it. So they're going to reap the benefits of it mostly, and the Colts playing competitive football, get them, as Jim says, battle hardened, to that kind of, element of competition where, younger Celtic teams just aren't facing it at the minute, so it just depends who's going to play in the Colts team and what's expected of them, but I look at the likes of Luke O'Connell going to Queen's Park and thriving, but I always thought that he should have thrived anyway at that level. You know what I mean? So, because these guys have got ability and he should be a standout at that level, but it's attitude. I always go back to your attitude to playing for the Colts. If you're playing for the Colts, your attitude should be that you want to break into that first team. So show us what you've got at that level, bust a gut and make yourself aware to the manager and the management team that they turn around and say, do you know what, we've got a guy in the Colts team who deserves to be pushing into squads, and that's what you're after. And that's what every Colts player, Celtic Colts player, should strive towards. Bust, give it all, because your next step is getting on the bench, in the first team. And then the step after that's graduating into the first team. So it shows what you're at. It's a huge chance, it's a huge opportunity, and it's something new for Scottish football as well. So let's embrace it, and see where we go with it. And I don't have a massive downer on it per se. I just want to see where we go with it and have it all kind of manifest, and see how the season progresses. But I think if you're trying and experimenting with new things like Colts teams in the league, then it can only be a good thing for the game, surely.
I would tend to agree with that, and I think any reticence people would have about it was, I think it was Rangers tweeted that their opening Colts game is sold out. So there will be financial benefits for the Lowland League clubs as well, I'm sure. Colin, just to get your thoughts on it before we wrap things up, Tony raised an interesting point there about it being a potential sort of place for players to prove themselves and look to make the step up to the Celtic full squad, if you like. Do you see that being the pathway for these players, or do you see it more as being an opportunity for them to show themselves to other clubs and potentially, boost the lower leagues in Scotland, or do you think it is a pathway to the first team for these players?
So luckily enough, I was able to be on the pre-match press conference with Tommy McIntyre earlier for a Celtic State of Mind, and the video will be up on the channel soon. And that was what I actually put across to him. I was asking him what the goals were for this season. Is it to win every game, or is it to do the development? And he's outright, he says it's development. He wants to develop the players. Although they want to win as many games as they can, they know they're not going to win every game. But if they can develop the next player to make that step up to the first team, that's what it's there to do. I followed that up by asking him what his thoughts were on the fact that we don't have the reserve football, and is this the future going forward? Should we be trying to introduce the Colts teams into the kind of lower leagues? And he says it's something that they're very much interested in. So I know there was meant to be a vote the other day that didn't go ahead on whether the kind of B teams would be introduced into a new setup within the Scottish football pyramid system. But I can see this being extended. The idea of the Celtic and Rangers Colts being in the Lowland League. I know it's only 1 year now, but I can see it being extended. And some of the rules for people, just in case they're interested, I know we're wrapping up, but the goalkeeper doesn't have to be under 21. So that's the rule. The players can move between the first team and the Colts teams, which is something that we weren't sure of before. And also, one that was quite interesting to me, and I don't know if you could pick someone out who might fall into this category, but if the assistant manager of the Colts is a registered player at the club, so say, for example, last year we'd have said it would have been Scott Brown, he is eligible to play for the Colts.
Right.
So I don't know who would actually fit into that criteria at the club at the minute, but maybe someone who's going to be coming back from injury, or someone that's looking to get into their coaching badges. If they become the assistant manager of the Colts, they're eligible to play for the Colts team. So it'll be an interesting one, and we do have some insight into the game on Saturday, knowing that our own Amy Canavan and Sean McGill, who are part of this channel here, will be doing the commentary for Bonnie Rigrose at the weekend. So I'm sure they'll have a vested interest in it, and they'll not be too biased, knowing where their allegiances lie.
It'll be an interesting one to watch anyway, and to see what happens going forward. Exciting times, something new, something fresh to have a go at, and I don't think, for all that we have to say about the failings of the Scottish game, trying something new and innovating is something that can only be praised. Unfortunately, we'll be ending things a little bit sharp today. Tony, Colin, I know you've got busy days ahead, and I have the privilege of representing a Celtic State of Mind at today's press conference with new signing Liel Abada. So I'm off to prepare for that. Colin, Tony, thanks very much for joining me today. Thanks everybody for your comments. As always, your engagement with us on the channel is much appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please get subscribing so that you can see our content coming out on the daily. We're already over 12,700 subscribers and growing every day. Thanks very much, everybody, and we will see you again this weekend for match coverage of our game against Preston. Goodbye.